Okay, so listen, what do you make of a little bit of anti-Semitism there from Joe Biden's Israeli ambassador? Unbelievable.
It's very difficult to understand this, but it may be a reflection of the rise of progressive policies inside the Democratic Party. And that's something that's a trend within the United States. And there's a significant influence of sympathy with the pro-boycott, divestment, sanction movement that seeks to delegitimize and economically isolate Israel, and the demonization of the Jewish person as a distorted white supremacist, and the Palestinian as a victim. I was very disturbed to come across that, and I found it very hard to believe that an American ambassador to Israel could have such sympathies. And he made a remark, I think, about the problematic martyrdom payments that the Palestinian authorities make to the families of martyrdom bombers. But I think what the bigger picture is, Israel needs to be aware that there may be shifting sand in the U.S.-Israeli alliance in the future. The Progressive Caucus is not a minority group in the Democratic Party with small amounts of power. It's approaching mainstream policies. And if they succeed, they want to take away the United States' ability to veto and protect Israel in the United Nations and pursue almost South Africa-like policies against the Israeli state. That doesn't mean that Israeli settlements are not problematic. Many Israelis object to the settlements and know that that undermines stability in the region. But this is a very concerning sympathy that someone in a senior position representing the United States to a major ally is sharing.
Rita.
Also concerning is this new Iran deal that the Biden administration is cooking up with the help of Russia, mind you. That seems to have been forgotten, that Russia seems to be an integral player in these negotiations. And analysts have said this is far worse for the region, far worse for Israel and the US and the Western allies than the Obama-Iranian deal.
Rita, you're absolutely right. And it's also very concerning to the Arab allies in the region, the Sunni Arab allies. So the Iranian deal really is running out of time itself. Iran has high quantities of enriched uranium. Time has been going by. Inspectors do not have access. Russia was one of the original 5 signatories to the deal, and Russia wants to ensure its trade with Tehran is not going to be restricted, even though it's now facing almost global sanctions. And Iran is demanding removal of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the Praetorian Guard of Iran, from foreign terrorist organization designation. Now, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is responsible for missile and drone attacks all across the region, in Iraq, on Kurdish interests, on Israel, on Israeli interests, in Yemen, in Syria. Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. All of that is currently designated as foreign terrorist organization activity, and that Iran wants reversed. It's quite astonishing, and all it's doing is drawing in allies, the Sunni Arab allies, the Abraham Accord nations with Israel closer. They are closing ranks, and they have already met, presumably, about these developments.
James.
And I want to follow up on the Abraham Accords, because clearly what this is going to do with Iran, it's going to push this whole infrastructure of relations between Israel, the growing relations between them and the Gulf states. That's going to fall apart now, won't it, if it looks like the West is now for Iran, if the U.S. is now pulling closer for whatever reason to Iran? And I'm struck by this question. Is the only similarity between supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia and supporting Iran against the Sunni Arab world that it's going to make energy prices higher? I can't figure out any other reason why the West and the progressive left is so keen to do business with America's enemies here.
Wow, James, I don't know the answer to that question. I actually think these conflicts, the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Iranian deal situation, is going to make the Middle East realize they're very much on their own. They must rely on each other, and they have to widen and deepen their alliances. Notice that the United Arab Emirates did not condemn Russia's actions on Ukraine. Notice also Turkey is a very key player diplomatically, engaging with Russia. It needs Russian business. It has huge economic ties with Russia, while it is also supplying incredible drone technology to Ukraine that is at the moment making the Russian advancement on Ukraine much more difficult. The United Arab Emirates and Egypt and also the other Sunni Arab allies are now facing problem solving over energy, security, intelligence. Saudi Arabia is not yet in the Abraham Accords, but also wants to have more security guarantees. And we've just seen a couple of days ago Iranian-backed Houthis strike Aramco installations within view of the Formula One Grand Prix race in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, for instance, the world's one of the leading oil producers on the planet, realizes the United States did not come to its defense in 2019 when Iranian drones struck Saudi Aramco. There was no response from the United States, and that is under President Trump. And similarly, again, there's no response from President Biden. I think what we're seeing is an incoherence in American foreign policy, and that means no one believes they can truly rely on the United States. And while Israel and the United States have a very important relationship, Israel has always been a lone state in a tough neighborhood, and Israel must start to think very long term around other alliances, which is why you're seeing Naftali Bennett be a dialogue channel with Putin. It's why Israel is developing very good relationships with China, and many of those are academic as well as logistic. So the entire world is shifting in large part because of American incoherence. I don't think it's only because of progressive policymakers. There's an absolute incoherence in the United States about its place in the world. And don't forget, we're just a few months away when we saw the catastrophic cord cutting of the United States from Afghanistan. And that country is now in total oblivion. So it's very discouraging for anyone that wants to make an alliance with the United States.